might have mentioned this before, but when I was teaching, I had in my syllabus, and I told the students on the first day, that there could be a quiz any day we were in class. So they could just expect, they were better off expecting that there was going to be a quiz every class. It did not make me, I have to admit, the most popular teacher in the world. But what I found myself, I can remember in high school sometimes cramming for tests or whatever, But I came to see, even in high school, that this was not really the way to study. And so when I started college, I made myself a promise that I would never study the night before a test or an exam or quiz or something. And I'd say for the most part, maybe 97% of the time, I stuck to that. I made myself study every day, so I wasn't worried about if a quiz or a test was coming. And in my experience anyway, it's what students always know. When are the tests so we can be prepared, And I just found that not to be the best way to get through college and really learn the material. And so Jesus this morning in the gospel, when he says, there will come a time when all this will pass away, that you think is so wonderful and so permanent, will be gone. And sure enough, what's the first question they ask? When will this happen? And how will we know? What signs are going to happen beforehand so we can be ready, And again, as usual, Jesus is clear by his answer that that's not the right question. And he basically says, don't worry about it. Which is a funny way of thinking about the end times. Don't worry about it. Because all through the Old Testament, we have just a taste of it in the first reading. It's that great and terrible day, Dies Irae, the day of wrath, the Old Testament talks that last day is going to be a day, as we hear in the first reading, when it'll be like an oven, and everything will be burned up. So how could you not worry about that day? But the prophet says, for those who fear me, he says that, God says it through the prophet, those who fear me, that blazing heat will be like the sun rising with healing rays. And that theme goes throughout the Old Testament too. We can find it in different places. When the Lord comes, the wicked will be in great distress. But those who love God will welcome that day. And so the same sun that burns everything up and destroys all evil will be a healing sun for the good. And Jesus says, before all this terrible stuff happens, you yourself will undergo certain trials. And don't worry about them either. I will give you a wisdom to speak when it's time for you to speak. The key, I think, is Jesus, that last line, by your perseverance, you will save your lives. And so that perseverance, seems to me, is the key. In other words, don't worry about the last day. Worry about this day. Stay close to God this day, and we won't worry about being torn away from God on the last day. And I was thinking this morning, how do we do that? And I wrote out a little something that might, because Augustine writes, let us not resist his first coming so that we may not dread the second. And spiritual writers have sort of always lumped that first coming, when I'm talking about Christmas now, but in this context, is when the Lord comes to us in the course of our lives. And this is what I wrote this morning. That first coming, quote unquote, happens again and again. Daily we have the opportunity to welcome Christ, to be and to stay close to him. And he'll come to us today. He comes to us today in the scriptures that we might listen and be converted. He comes to us in the Eucharist that we might worship him and be transformed. But he may come to us today in beauty that we might praise him. He may come to us in some blessing or an answer to a prayer that we might thank him. He might come to us today in some great work that we might praise him, or in some great insight about God that we might praise his greatness. He might come to us today in someone who is poor, so that we might be generous to him. He might come to us today in someone who is sick or in great sorrow or loss, that we might comfort him. He might come to us today in our enemy or in someone who has hurt us, so that we might show him forgiveness and mercy. He might come to us today in someone slowing us down or frustrating our plans, so that we might be patient with him. He might come to us today in sickness, pain, or loss, or misfortune, that we may depend on him and show him our perseverance. He might come to us today, and he will come for sure to us today in time, that we might use some of it in prayer, to talk to him, to listen to him. It seems to me, if we welcome him day after day and choose to be close to him and be with him, we'll be prepared for that last day and we'll be ready to welcome him. It seems, just as it may seem odd that someone would expect to go through the whole semester, cram one night for the test, and think that he or she is going to really learn the material. So it seems odd to me that someone might think, well, I'll ignore God, whether we think in these terms or not, we usually don't. But do we really think that we can ignore God and go through our lives concerned only with our own things, and then at the last moment think we're going to welcome him? I don't think so. So let's welcome him today. Let's worry about today and let him take care of tomorrow.